That book was so freaking good, and it completely took me by surprise. Guns, 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 and monsters. You better go stock up on maple syrup right now. Yo, what is going on? Thank you so much for joining in. So today, we have my very first starter pack here on the channel, so I think it's gonna be a good one. So a few weeks ago, I reached out to Baen on X or Twitter or whatever you're calling it nowadays. I asked them a very serious question. And if you're not familiar with Baen, they have been around for a while, since like 1983. They're a science fiction and fantasy publisher. I think they have well over 2,000 books, which is a ton. The crazy thing is that I have not read a single one. Huh? What also is crazy is that Baen now publishes my favorite ongoing series at this point, and that is the Sun Eater series by Christopher Rocchio. So I know they have great books underneath their belt, so I wanted to check out what else do they have underneath their umbrella of books. So I did what any sensible person would do. I asked the internet. More specifically, I asked Baen on Twitter, asking them what 3 books would they recommend for me to get a good sense of the books that they publish. And from that tweet, I got a ton of great recommendations of authors and books I definitely have not read or heard of before, and 3 names came up time and time again. Then those 3 names, they were David Weber, Larry Correia, and John Ringo. So you know what I did? I went and bought some books, I read some books, and now I have thoughts on the Baen Books starter pack. So if you're ready, let's dive into it. So the 3 books that I bought were On Basilisk Station by David Weber, Monster Hunter International by Larry Correia, and Live Free or Die by John Ringo. 3 books and 3 authors I have not read or heard of before until this point. And oh my gosh, I had my mind blown. So first, I wanted to start off with On Basilisk Station by David Weber. Whew, that book was so freaking good, and it completely took me by surprise. And before I dive into my thoughts on the book, I wanted to talk about what the book is all about. So first thing I wanted to look at was actually the cover. And looking at the cover, you can definitely tell it has some military influence in space with cats. And I have to be honest here, the cover, it was just not doing it for me at the very beginning for a few reasons. Number one, I can definitely tell that, it has some military background in it. And usually military sci-fi books do not appeal to me, because usually when I think of military sci-fi, I think of, Star Trek. And at this time, I did not want to read Star Trek. I'd rather go watch Star Trek. So that's number one reason why it wasn't really doing it for me. And number 2 is that just the cover alone, it looks dated. Which makes sense because I think it came out around like 1992. So it came out, relatively a while ago. Which is not to say that old books do not have great stories. It simply was just not drawing me in. So what is the story all about? So we actually follow our main character, Honor Harrington, who is on the front cover of the book, who is put in an unwinnable situation in the backwaters of the galaxy at Basilisk Station. It was her job to maintain relations with the local planet government in that area, and also police the entire station and system, all using her single starship. And then out of nowhere, she winds up in a large-scale conspiracy that threatens war across the galaxy. And I gotta say, I love this line out of the book's description. The Aborigines of the system's only habitable planet are smoking homicide-inducing hallucinogens. I think that alone is enough to draw me into a book, because that just sounds freaking interesting and very different. So what makes the story great, and why did I enjoy it so much? Number 1 is that it is very character driven. Usually when I think of military sci-fi or anything that's in hard sci-fi, it's usually a bunch of technical mumbo jumbo that is very detailed into the weeds on how certain elements work, like space travel and how a starship functions. Not placing too much focus on the human element or the characters within a story. This was not the case at all in this story. We had multiple characters that were fully fleshed out, especially our main character, Honor Harrington. We get to dive into multiple characters' backstory, get to see their emotions, get to see their drive on what is making them move forward day by day. And it's really entertaining to see this interaction between the characters as well. And it really helps build a connection to multiple characters within the story. And number 2 is almost in the same lines of it being character driven, is that we have character progression. I think everybody is pretty much a fan of developing friendships in a sci-fi setting, or really any book in general, which is definitely evident by the super popular Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. And on Basilisk Station, I think it has a friendship development within that story that is on the same level as Project Hail Mary, or even more. And number 3 is the plot within this story. It's full of action, full of political intrigue, character progression, and an overarching mystery that keeps you interested from page 1 all the way to the end. I also have to say some of the action scenes in this book were phenomenal. They really got my adrenaline pumping. And a few videos ago, I made up a word called redrenaline, which basically means whenever you're reading a particular scene in a book and it gets your adrenaline spiking up. Well, this book is full of adrenaline because there's multiple scenes that come out of nowhere that keep you super engaged, making you turn page to page. There's one scene in particular where I literally went, so there were some things in this story that I don't think will completely jive with every reader out there. With the first one being that, with it being a sort of hard sci-fi book, there are certain pages or sequences where we get into the technical mumbo jumbo, where we have a couple pages on how certain things work. And if you're not a fan of getting into the details on how like a starship works and how it moves, or even a political system and how it operates, it might not jive with you. But I definitely think it adds to the overall universe building within the story. And the last thing, it might be a hot take, but I personally believe that if the book was re-released with a new modern cover, we might get a ton of new readers interested in diving into the story. Now, I do know that the current cover, it might add to the charm of the overall series. It'd be sentimental to some people, especially the original fans. But I'm telling you, the story was so freaking good, and I think a new cover might entice new readers to dive into the Honor Harrington series, where the current cover, it might sway away people, but that is just my opinion on the book cover itself. And to sum it all up, I had a fantastic experience reading on Basilisk Station, and I would highly recommend it to anyone looking for an action-packed, character-driven sci-fi book. Alright, before we move on to book number 2, if you're enjoying the video so far, go ahead and click that like button and subscribe, if you don't mind. I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Alright, book number 2 was Monster Hunter International, and the easy way to describe this book is guns, 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 and monsters. And by the title of the book, you can probably tell that monsters have a big component within the story, but what is the story really all about? Well, we follow our main character, Owen Z. Pitt, where he abruptly finds out that monsters are real, but also that the government has been keeping it hush-hush for centuries. And in Men in Black fashion, we have a company whose sole purpose is to eradicate the monsters that pose a threat and cause chaos, all for a pretty penny. In the story, it starts off really strong, with us following our main character where he's working a very humble job as an accountant, but then his world gets turned upside down where he's thrown into the wolves, literally. And the closest comparison that I can make to this book is the Dresden Files, where it is urban fantasy based, full of action and humor, with a hint of mystery interspersed throughout the story. And instead of magic that we have in Dresden Files, we have guns aplenty in Monster Hunter International. Not to say there are no magical elements found within the story, there definitely is, it's just the main component is guns versus magic that you would see in Dresden Files. So what all did I enjoy from the story? Well, number 1 is that I think it had a really fun and engaging plot. Owen is a very comical character, especially the dialogue that he has with his friends and his pals that make it really fun and entertaining to read through. It was also very interesting to read about all the different varieties of monsters within this world, from werewolves, vampires, gargoyles, elves, and more. It was also especially nice to have vampires portrayed in a way that wasn't in a teenage romance, but instead portrayed as something to actually fear. I also love the way that elves were represented within the story. It's something that is incredibly comical and like nothing I've ever seen before for elves. Number 2 is that if you are a gun lover, you will have a great time within this book. I can't even tell you the number of variations and types of guns that we got in this book, but I do know doing a quick F5 or a quick search within the book, within Kindle at least, for the word gun, there were over 270 hits. So just to give you some context. Number 3 is that it's just a fun, entertaining read that's not too serious, where you have to take meticulous notes or reference other material to understand what's happening. There's also a ton of really awesome cinematic scenes that I think would look great on the screen someday if that were to happen in the future. So not everything worked for me within this story and might not sit right for everyone that reads this book. With the first one being is that character progression is really not apparent in the story at all. Our main character Owen is a new recruit in Monster Hunter International, but somehow he is performing at the same level as the people that have been there for years, who are apparently the best of the best, but he's just a new recruit and he's already at that same level or the same tier as them, even though he's just learned about monsters a couple weeks ago. So Owen starts off as a monster killing badass from beginning to end, not really growing, just starting off good at about everything. And number 2 is actually one from the good things about the book, is that the gun prominence found within the story might sway some people away. Like in a hard sci-fi novel, you know how we get into the technical mumbo jumbo of how, you know, certain sci-fi elements work. Well, we get into something very similar, but from a gun perspective, where we go into intricate details on how certain guns work and how they look and how they operate. So if you're not really interested in guns, these scenes or sequences might not be that engaging to you, but if you don't really mind it, then it's not going to be an issue. And to sum this one all up, I would say I had a fun, enjoyable, and action-packed read into the world of monsters and guns, and would recommend it to anyone who likes just that: monsters, guns, and action. Alright, book number 3 is Live Free or Die by John Ringo. And all I have to say is you better go stock up on maple syrup right now. This book was one of my most interesting reads of the year. I had no preconceived notions going into the story. All I did was just briefly skim the book's description and look at the cover, of course. From the book's description, I thought we would have a story, you know, similar to Red Rising, where we would have a sole character infiltrate the ranks of the aliens, or have a character raise an army of rebels in order to take on the hordes of aliens. But no, this was not that at all. So what is the story all about? Well, we follow our main character named Tyler Vernon, who was living a normal life, making great strides as a webcomic author, until one day his life changed forever alongside all other humans on the planet. Aliens placed a halo-like ring in our solar system that allows not only us to travel through it to get to different star systems, but also allows other alien races to get to us. And exactly that happens. An alien race named the Horvath enter our solar system and wreak havoc on Earth, decimating 3 large cities on the planet. Us humans are no match for these aliens. Their technology is years and years away from where we are today.
We have technology!
Tyler, our humble webcomic author and handyman, then decides that he wants to try to even the playing fields. From here, this book went several directions, just getting wilder and wilder, putting me in a spot where I simply could not predict what was going to happen next. We go from aliens entering our solar system and bombing the heck out of us, to maple syrup being a commodity that aliens simply cannot resist, to an epidemic threatening all humans across the globe, to a massive Death Star-like structure that has the ability to shoot out massive solar beams. So yeah, this book had a lot in it, and it was definitely crazy to say the least. But what all did I enjoy out of it? Number 1 is that I definitely enjoyed the unpredictability of it. I literally had no idea from page to page what was going to happen next, completely taking me by surprise in multiple scenes. Going from an alien invasion to selling maple syrup was something that I never envisioned reading or coming across in the story, and it was a fun time. Also, a quick note on the maple syrup. The reason why it's such a hot commodity is that the aliens treat it almost like a alcohol or drug-like substance, where they go absolutely nuts for it. And this happens within the first couple chapters, so it's not that much of a spoiler. I also really enjoyed the world building, or should I say the universe building within the story, where we got to learn what is outside of our solar system and see the technology and structures that aliens far, far out in the galaxy have compared to us primitive humans. However, I do think that there are some elements within this story that will hold back certain people from enjoying the story, with the first one being a influence of political ideas from the author. I think it's completely fine to have different ideas on how a political system or how the world should work, as long as it adds value to the narrative and the overall story. The stance on government within the story is that it's basically effectively useless against the oncoming invasion and the oppression from the aliens. And the survival of humans is basically left up to one single guy who has an entrepreneurial spirit. This theme of government being effectively useless and other conservative values are definitely placed throughout the story, which might dissuade people from enjoying the story and the overall book. And number 2 is that in hard sci-fi fashion, Ringo goes into super technical details of the mumbo jumbo on how certain things work, how mining asteroids works, how the construction of spaceships work, how the movement from one spot to another works. It goes on for pages in some scenarios. So if you're really not interested in that type of language within a book, or interested in learning more of these theoretical but close to reality concepts within a book, it might not be that engaging or interesting for you to read, and this is definitely a major component within the story. And number 3 is that this is definitely not a story that is a visual or visceral experience where he's putting Picasso-like paintings in your head. The style of the story is told very bluntly and as matter of fact. If you're looking for an experience where you're immersed into a story, feeling as though that you're actually there with the main characters, this book is not that at all. And to sum it all up, this was definitely an enjoyable read that I could not predict what was going to happen next. And if you are a fan of alien invasions, military sci-fi, and the entrepreneurial spirit, I would recommend this book for you. And there we go. That is our Baen Books starter pack. 3 books that I deeply enjoyed. I would definitely recommend for you to get a good sense into the books that Baen publishes from definitely a range within the sci-fi and fantasy realm, all with their own writing style and unique stories. 3 books I probably would have not picked up if it weren't from the countless recommendations on my initial Twitter post. So to all those who did give me those recommendations, thank you so much. And tell me down below if you think any other Baen books should be placed within this starter pack, or if you've read any of these 3, tell me what your thoughts were. And for sticking around this long, you've earned 1 XP token, and if you're already a subscriber, you get an extra XP token. So here you go. And do not think I don't track who has the most XP tokens, because I see all. And that is all I have for you. Have a good one. Peace.